A good Noventag Alamin, Zeit begrüßt. My name's Devorah Zilberman, and I have the pleasure of chairing this evening. Before we begin, though, in Nomen von dem Bund will ich anerkennen die traditionelle Abhitel von dem Land, wo wir treffen sich heint in Novent, das Bundverong-Volk von dem Kullenvolk, und wir geben ab Covid sehr Imes und Aves von dem Avel, von dem Ossid und Zukünftige. On behalf of the Bund, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which each of us find ourselves this evening, for many of us being the Bundverong people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. We also, as an organisation, support the Uluru Statement as the most viable way forward for both justice and reconciliation. And we encourage all those attending this evening to read more and find out more about how they can support the statement at ulurustatement.org. Just some housekeeping before we begin. You should all, at this point, unfortunately, not be able to unmute yourselves, as this evening isn't quite a regular discussion we would have. It's there will be opportunities for you to ask questions, so please feel free to send your questions directly to me in the chat. I'll be listed as Bundistkes, which is a dead giveaway, and we will try and answer as many questions as possible at the end of today's session. I'll also note that this event is being recorded. So, to quote the late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, women belong in all places where decisions are being made. And we already know this to be true, as in 1897, in the attic of an inn, just on the outskirts of Vilna, 13 delegates, including 2 women, founded the Jewish Labour Bund. And if you're wondering why there weren't more women attending the founding, several of the would-be female delegates were not busy cooking in the kitchen. They were out getting arrested by Tsarist police and organising the masses. From the very beginning, women have played a vital role in the success of our movement, often putting their lives at risk to fight for the ideals of Freiheit, Gleichheit, and Gerechtigkeit. However, we know that history is often recorded as just that, his story. And so many of the Bundistkes who have paved the way for us have faded into the background. However, tonight, our dynamic panel is going to bring just some of these Bundistkes back to the forefront and celebrate them for the mächtige Leben, the mighty lionesses they were. In listening to these stories, we each take on the responsibility of carrying these legacies forward for future generations of Skifisten and Bundisten. Our first presenter this evening is Hinde Ina Burstin. Born about us, she is a 3rd-generation Bundistke and a lifelong feminist and activist. For many years, she embodied Bund philosophy as a community worker with culturally and linguistically marginalised women, survivors of sexual violence and of domestic violence, young women, lesbians, and women with disabilities. More recently, she has lived Bund philosophy as a Yiddish teacher, writer, translator, and researcher of Yiddish and Yiddish women writers. Please welcome our first speaker, Chaverte Hinde Bushkin.
Hartstikke Dank dir, Dwoire. Thank you, Dwoire, and the Jewish Labour Bund. I too would like to acknowledge the elders of the Bunurong Nation as the traditional owners and custodians of the land from which I am zooming to you today, and to affirm that sovereignty was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Tonight, I'd like to particularly pay my respects to First Nations women who live at the intersections of racism and misogyny, and who remain strong and resolute in fighting for justice, equality, and freedom. I'd like to thank the Jewish Labour Bund for organising this event, the Jüdische Arbeiter Bund, and for inviting me to speak. I think it's such an important event, and part of why I think it's so important is that in my 11 years as a skiffist, I was never once in a kreis that was named after Bundistkes or after any woman. And in the whole time that I was at Skiff, there was only one kreis ever that was named after a woman, and that was Anna Hella Rosenthal, who you may hear about tonight. So I really hope that the Bund will take this up, and maybe it can even become an annual event, because there are so many brilliant Bundistkes that we need to learn about. So I had a bit of a hard time deciding who to speak about. So I'm actually going to introduce a few people before speaking a bit more about a particular Bundiske who has inspired my life very deeply. So I want to mention a couple of women that I've come across in my research. Berthe Allenberg, whose article Zu 13 Jahrwerk an Arrestantke, Revolutionäre Erinnerungen, which was published in October 1928 in Freiheit, was a young Bundiske who was arrested at the age of 13. And her memoirs are just fascinating. They really paint a clear picture of what the early days of the Bund were like, and show the courage and commitment of a young woman who, despite what she went through, never ratted out on her comrades. And I love using that text in teaching, particularly with Skiff Helfer when they're students in my classes, because it's so eye-opening about the history of the organisation we're so proud to be part of and where it began. Another woman I've come across in my travels, in my research, is Dr. Esther Luria, who was born in Warsaw in 1877. I was pretty amazed at a woman who had a PhD so early. She studied in 1899 to 1903 at Bern University, where she gained a doctorate in humanistic sciences. And I thought, oh, she must have been a rich woman who, was able to go to university. But turned out she was a working class woman who put everything on the line to be able to study. She was so committed. She became involved in Bundist activities and joined the Bund in socialist activities. She joined the Bund in 1904, and she was arrested several times before being sentenced to Siberia in 1906. In 1912, she escaped to America, where she spent the next few years publishing extensively about Yiddish literature and lecturing about Yiddish literature and about word literature, and particularly about women in Yiddish literature. She's written an incredibly impressive body of work, all from a feminist perspective, analysing El Peretz, Shalom Aleichem, from a feminist perspective. Which, I hope one day there'll be a project to collect her work, because it's just phenomenal. She also edited the journal Die Gleichheit, which was the weekly publication of the Vest and Dressmakers Union, where she published historical accounts of political movements. She lived in extreme poverty, and she, like many Yiddish women writers, she died alone, date unknown, was in Bronx sometime in the 1920s. One more Bundistkes that I want to mention briefly before going on to the main Bundistkes I want to present today is my Buba, Chayele Brotmacher Rosenstein von der Heim Rabinovich, who was born in 1902 and died in 1990. She was what we call a gemeindliche Mitglied, a rank and file member of the Bund, who was a teacher of Yiddish and Yiddish history. She contributed to the Bund according to her ability and then some. She was a passionate Bundistkes who lived her life by Bund principles and never wavered in her commitment to Bundism. And her integrity and her ideals deeply inspire my life. And now I want to talk to you about someone else who also inspires my life, probably above all for her integrity and for the incomparable contribution she has made to current day, I think, all facets of Bundist philosophy, Yiddishkeit, Deutlichkeit, and Sozialism, Freiheit, Gleichheit, Gerechtigkeit. And that is the incomparable Irena Klettfisch. Irena was born in 1941 in the Warsaw Ghetto. At the age of 2, she was hidden in an orphanage on the Aryan side where her mother worked as a maid. And her mother ended up having to kidnap her from the orphanage after the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, not our uprising, but the later uprising of 1944. And they hid in the Polish countryside until the war was over, and then lived in Łódź and Sweden before coming to New York in 1949. She studied at City College of New York, where she got a BA in English, and where she convinced Max Weinreich to set up a Yiddish course, which was the first Yiddish course in America. So already, like, how badass is that? She really got Yiddish studies in America going, and you know, Yiddish academia is huge and has spurned so many generations of Yiddish scholars and teachers and researchers. So I'm particularly grateful to her for that. She worked as a counselor at Boyberg, and then she got her PhD in English literature from the University of Chicago in 1970. At that time, she worked at YIVO, and then she went on to study postgraduate studies at the Max Weinreich Center for Advanced Jewish Studies. In the 70s, she became very involved in feminism and also in lesbian feminist activism. And sadly, this caused a rupture with YIVO and with the Yiddish organizations that she was involved with, who ostracized her. And it was, you know, both socially and economically really marginalizing experience for her. In 1986, she co-edited The Tribe of Dinah, a brilliant, brilliant book, the first collection of Jewish women's anthology. If you haven't read it, you need to run out run out within 2 kilometers and borrow it and read it, because it really is worth reading. And in that collection, she has a number of really important contributions. She has an essay, Secular Jewish Identity, Yiddishkeit in America, where she discusses 6 Bundistkes, 6 women of the Bund. So go out and read it, you'll find out more. Those 6 women are Esther Lipschitz, Anna Lipschitz, Julia Abramovich, Nadia Koenig-Schaff-Greenfeld, Gina Klettfisch, and Patti Kremer. She also calls for greater inclusion, saying that the Yiddish world needs to be open to feminism, and the feminist world needs to be open to Jewish cultures, including Yiddish. She includes 3 bilingual poems in the collection that are brilliant: Die Reise heim, The Journey Home, Etliche Werte auf Mameloschen, A Few Words in the Mother Tongue, and a poem, Fradelstock, about the writer Fradelstock. And she includes 2 translations of short stories. The Lost Shabbos, which is her translation of Katja Maladowski's story, Der verlorene Shabbos, and The Shorn Head, her translation of Fradelstock's short story, Die abgeschnittene Haar, which consistently rates in my literature and translation classes as one of the favourite stories of students. Now, this publishing of these translations is incredibly significant, because this was the first time that a Yiddish prose writer was published, woman prose writer was published in translation. Up until that point, any translation of Yiddish prose was writing by men. Eke didn't stop with those two. She's since published many more and has inspired several generations of feminist translators. She really rallied women around and said, if we don't do this, nobody's going to do it. And it really is thanks to her that we're not living in the world that Irving Howe so nicely phrased as the world of our fathers, that she's, you know, made space for women in Yiddish literature. And in fact, I know some women who studied Yiddish just so that they would be able to translate Yiddish women writers, because they were so inspired by Irina. I'll try and race through everything else she's done. So there's The Tribe of Dinah. She published 2 brilliant books, Dreams of an Insomniac, Jewish Feminist Essays, Speeches and Diatribes. You can see it's like marked everywhere. It's so brilliant. And the companion collection, A Few Words in the Mother Tongue, Poems Selected and New. She really is a very talented poet. She's also has a brilliant essay. She was the Yiddish consultant of Bridges' Jewish Feminist Journal for a number of years. And one of the best things in here is Feminism, Yiddishkeit and the Politics of Memory, where she looks at Die Mamas das Loschen, where she looks at 4 famous Yiddish women personalities. One of them is Anna Hella Rosenthal, but she says that feminism pushed her to look beyond her own community. And it's one of the things that she's really taught me, that if we're really going to talk about Gleichheit, we need to talk beyond just our own community. And she published a brilliant introduction called The Queens of Contradiction, a feminist introduction to Yiddish women writers, which is really an essay well worth reading. Look it up. She co-organised a Yiddish conference called Die Freuen and published the papers, which will shortly be digitised. That was in the 1995-96. She co-edited Women's Call for Peace, a handbook for Jewish women on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. She also, in The Tribe of Dinah, co-wrote a handbook for dealing with anti-Semitism, which I used through the 90s. I ran lots of anti-racism workshops, and that really guided me. And the 2 most recent ones that I want to show you, and if you want copies, I can arrange them. Some of them you can get online. The Stars Bear Witness, the Jewish Labour Bund, 1897 to 2017. She co-organised a brilliant event in New York for the Bund 120 and produced this absolutely stunning book of Bund history. And the annual gathering commemoration at the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising 75th anniversary, similarly a beautiful, beautiful book. Irina's a perfectionist who pours her heart and soul and energy into everything she does. It's so beautifully done and with such integrity. And despite ostracism, she's lived her entire life by Bund philosophy. You can see the things she's done. She's built up Deutschkeit community. She's worked tirelessly for Yiddishkeit. For those of you who think translation's not working for Yiddishkeit, I want to tell you that the vast majority of Yiddish women prose writers I came across first in translation and then went back to them in Yiddish. I'm going to finish just on a personal level and say that I have an incredible debt of gratitude to Irina Klepfish. I first came across her writing in a book called Nice Jewish Girls, a lesbian anthology. A co-worker gave this to me a while after I'd come out, when I was feeling really like I had no place in the Jewish community and certainly no place in the Bund. And to find Irina Klepfish's work in there, Irina Klepfish, who, as I purposely didn't mention earlier, is the daughter of Michal Klepfish, hero of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and who my first Kaiser's gift was named after. To find someone who shared my background and my politics, who could be a feminist and who could be a lesbian. I'm not exaggerating when I say that saved my life, to know that even if it was on the other side of the world, there was someone like me. She has nurtured generations of feminist researchers. She has contributed more to Jewish, Yiddish, lesbian, feminist, socialist community than absolutely anyone I know. She's mentored me personally. She is just incredible. Look her up, Google her, read her, research her. She will enrich your life. And I'm certainly grateful to her for all she's given to my life. Hashem Dank.
A Dank Hinde, or should I say Lehrerin Hinde. I'm very, very excited to introduce our next speaker in her Bund public speaking debut. So we'll all be friendly, we promise. Yoni Ringelblum is the 4th generation of Bundisten in her family and exudes the values of the Bund through her commitment to both Yiddish language and Skiff. Yoni will become the next link in a golden chain of Ringelblum Helfer next year, of which she is very proud, and she follows in the footsteps of her badass bubbas Marilla, Erica, and Paula. Ladies and gentlemen, Yoni Ringelblum.
Hi, so I'll be speaking about Rachel Holzer. So I first came across her last year when studying for my detailed study as part of BC Yiddish, and I chose to focus on her because of my love of theatre and her influence on my grandmother's theatre career. But I was amazed at the things I learned about her life and her work and determination to raise the status of women in Yiddish theatre and theatre in general. Universally, she is regarded as the most important Jewish actress in Australia. Many of her theatre choices were influenced by her Bundist ideologies. Different sources give different dates of her birth. Some say 1899 and some say 1900. Holzer grew up in a Bundist household as her father was a unionist and became familiar with many Yiddish songs through him. Her first performance was at age 6, and as a teenager, she trained in a drama school and performed professionally in the top Polish theatre. She played with the Vilna Truppe in 1827, where she worked with Janka Weislitz, with whom she later worked in Melbourne. In her late 30s, she moved to Warsaw and continued to perform with the Polish National Theatre, as well as one-woman shows in Yiddish and Polish. She worked with David Herman and her husband Chaim Rosenstein. However, she was not dependent on them, and her name spoke for itself. In 1936, she starred in the film Al Chet, and later she and her husband decided to tour Europe before visiting Australia. Her final performance in Warsaw sold out with 1,500 seats. She arrived in Australia on April 2nd, 1939, and first performed in Melbourne on the 15th. Her talent was so greatly known that not only did the Yiddish press note the performance, but also many who could not understand Yiddish. Due to the war, they had to stay in Australia and could not go to Poland. She performed in Sydney to a large audience before returning to Melbourne. In October of 1939, she became the first woman to direct a play in Australia, and the theme of the play was women's rights. When Janka Weislitz returned to Melbourne in 1940, they formed a partnership and oversaw some of the greatest years of Yiddish theatre in Melbourne, forming the Yiddish theatre under the name of Rachel's former mentor, David Herman. They initially produced a comedy and later an entire season of 8 plays. As well as contributing to the David Herman Theatre, Rachel also performed on ABC Radio, taught drama, and after the war toured France, Belgium, Switzerland, Ireland, Israel, and Sweden, promoting Yiddish theatre and women in theatre, at a time when they were badly neglected. Throughout her career, she performed in Yiddish and English on many stages, participating in Holocaust commemorations, Bund events, celebrations, and evening at the Kadima. Her final performance was Die Hilzene Schüssel, in which, as it happens, my father and grandmother also took part. Despite her formal career ending, she continued to mentor and occasionally perform, as well as remaining an active member of the Bund organization, contributing to Ghetto Academias and Bund Jovels till the day she died at age 98. I'm going to try and share some photos. So these are some of the photos of her. This one is of her performing, and this is just a photo of her. And then here is a poster of one of her performances with Yankev Weislitz. And I also have a poster from her final performance. From her final performance of Die Hiltsener Schüssel, and she's in the photo somewhere there. Yeah.
Schönem Dank, Joni. Sehr gut gemacht. And I think we all wish we had as fabulous eyebrows as Rachel Holzer, just saying. Our next speaker is well known to our community as the host of the Half-Baked Bund History YouTube series. Daniel Goldberg is also contributor to the newly published revitalization of Link magazine. He is the secretary of the Jewish Labour Bund, as well as being involved on the In One Voice committee and the Yiddish Australia committee. And in his spare time, he enjoys trawling through Yiskel books to find the unsung heroes of the Bund and their stories. Please welcome Chavel Daniel Goldberg.
Thank you very much, Devorah. And I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners from where I'm zooming tonight. That's the Wadawurrung people. And I forward that respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. It's safe to say I'm the least qualified to be here tonight. I'm not a badass Bundistkes, but I do want to send my thanks and respect to all the other people that I'm sharing the panel with tonight, because they're all definite badass Bundistkes in my eyes. Two of them having been my Yiddish teachers, actually, at one point in my life. And also Joni was a student with me in VCA Yiddish last year and absolutely smashed it out of the park. So I have a lot of badass Bundistkes in my life who have shaped it in one way or another. And so I thank all of them for the amazing work they do and continue to do today. So today, though, I'm going to be talking a bit more about this character that was larger than life and the most badass you can get. Her name is affectionately Madame Ika, or Chavete Ika. A few of you may have seen my YouTube series where I spoke a little bit about Madame Ika. And I'll be talking, you may have already heard a lot of the things that I have said today, but I hope we can think about exactly some of the amazing things that she did in her life to not only make other people's lives better, but also the Bund and Yiddish-speaking communities for generations to come. Ika was born to a Hasidic family, so I think the most badass thing you can do, first of all, is tell your Hasidic father that you're going to be a Bundist. And they were from Schertz, which is northeast of Warsaw. And they grew up in a frum family. She received a Hasidic education, but she was also sent to a private Polish and Russian school in Warsaw at the age of 15. As a teen, Ika showed her strong sense of Havashaft and social justice, and she ran educational programs for girls in Schertz who came from poor families. And that's where she would teach them to speak or to read and write in Yiddish and in Polish. She also pushed girls who were working as maids to demand some more free time from their employers so that they could complete their studies. And this was long before Ika knew anything about even the word socialism. Even though Schelps had its own Bund and heavily influenced the population there, it was in Warsaw that Ika actually came across the Bund and was influenced by the Bund due to their very obviously large presence in Poland. And it opened up a new world for her, strengthening her desire to continue working for justice and equality in her community and her wider community. During World War I, worker activity in Warsaw, or Jewish worker activity, flourished. And Ika then became heavily involved with the Bund. She worked with a lot more of her other Chavayim within the Bund to set up the Größer Kinderheimen, which were children's homes, which is where she spent a lot of her time. And it was through these homes that later the Zisho Yiddish school system would develop. Ika moved to Paris in 1924, which is where her work is best remembered for her active role in the French Bund and Bundist organisations Arbeiterring and SCIF. The Arbeiterring was founded by French Bundists in 1932 in a large building in central Paris. The building housed the Nomberg Library, which was named after Herr David Nomberg, who was a Yiddish writer, who was the mentee of Yud Lamed Peretz as well. It housed an office as well, and a reading room and a worker's kitchen. And it was the kitchen, I'm sorry, Devora, if you can go to the next page, I think there's an image of the building. Maybe. Oh no, that's okay. Yeah, that's the building there where this was all housed. And the kitchen was the last arm of the Arbeiterring. So the library and the reading room sort of came before, and the kitchen was developed then at the beginning of World War II, just before the anti-Jewish legislation was starting to be passed in France. The workers' kitchen fed Jewish workers and homeless Jews and hungry Jewish students and wives of Jewish men who were called to the front for France. Ika was designated by the Bund to be the head administrator of this workers' kitchen, and she quickly became the soul of the kitchen, and she was providing support for anyone who walked through the doors, whether it be an arm to cry, a shoulder to cry on, or to give advice to people. She would read letters to wives from their husbands that were still at the front, and she would also be the keeper of everyone's deepest, darkest secrets. She was the trustworthy ear and the close friend that everyone needed during those difficult times. But she wasn't just a hardworking manager of the kitchen. No, she did way more than that. She was a hard-working, ardent activist as well. When Parisian Jewish community leaders met on the day after the Nazis entered Paris, they established the Amelot Committee, which you can see in that image. Thank you, Devora. And that's the Amelot Committee there. They were an illegal underground committee that worked to organise illegal departures from Paris. And also they found families for Jewish children to be hidden with in the French countryside during the war. Although many Jews fled, and I've got a photo of those children as well. Sorry, that was that other image later, Deborah. Yeah, that one there, thank you. Although many Jews fled post-Nazi occupation of Paris, Ika decided that she would stay firm and protect her kitchen and the people inside it. Despite her having an American visa, she decided to stay there. She could use the visa to get to safety, but she really wanted to be there to protect all those that were seeking refuge. The building was one of the very few that were running at the time in terms of Jewish organisations, and the building and the organisation would be constantly intimidated by and attacked by Nazis while it was running. The Nazis entered the premises in 1942 with the aim of confiscating all the books from the Nomberg Library. But before they had entered the Arbeiterring, the workers there stored tins of food way up past waist height so that people couldn't get into the cupboards without having to move all these cans first. So it was decided that the Gestapo would then return the next day to clear the tins and take the books. In the meantime, overnight, Ika and a few others who worked at the Arbeiterin transported around 5,000 books in wooden boxes down to the second cellar, which was 2 floors below ground. The Gestapo stormed the Arbeiterin and arrested Ika the next day. However, they never found these books. And these books form the basis of the collection of the Medem Yiddish Bibliothek in Paris, which continues its work today. And I think I have an image of, just after the war, there's an image of the library sort of being set up again. It's just a group photo, Deborah.
Should be popping up shortly.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. So Ika was arrested and taken into a jail which was called Fort Romanville, I believe. And there she was constantly tortured. She was put in isolation and she went through severe questioning. But the whole time she maintained her loyalty to her Chaveirim and not once revealed any names of any of the Chaveirim she worked with in Paris and abroad. She continued to provide that support and care to her fellow imprisoned Chaveirim until her death, October 1942. But her memory lives on, and in Paris and in France, the Skiff and Bund Chateau, where the Skiff camps were held later, was named after Ika. And it's still there today and still houses Jewish camps, which we can see in that image there. And I'll finish with a quote by one of the Chaveirim of Ika about her quality. Bringing harmony in human relationships, joy, true and pure joy in people's lives, that was the culmination of her socialist ideal. There are people in whom joy is drawn from their luck, from their destiny, which has freed them from suffering and worry. Ika did not belong to this category. Her life was hard and full of worries, and in light of her own difficulties, she understood the importance of joy in everyday life, and if she could no longer bring joy to her own home, she brought it wherever she saw the slightest cloud of sorrow and unhappiness. Ashainam Dank.
Ashainam Dank, Daniel. That was fantastic. And for those who haven't seen your French episode of Half-Baked Bund History, it's available on YouTube now and definitely worth a watch. Our final speaker this evening is well known for her exceptional knowledge of Bund history, which led to her writing a volume of biographies of well-known Bundisten. Bobby Zilberman is a Yiddish educator, having taught across all ages. In fact, some of her former students, including Daniel, are with us this evening. She has been involved in Bund life since her childhood as a hemshechist in New York, and she continues her activism in Melbourne today. Chaveirim, please welcome Bobby Zilberman.
Good Abend. I'll be speaking about two women from two different generations of Bundist history, starting with Luba Levinson Eisenstadt, from the first generation of Bundistkes. She was born in 1866 in Vilna. Her family were wealthy merchants. She had a good education and had every intention of continuing her education after graduation in Western Europe. But her father forbade this plan. So the 18-year-old ran away to Switzerland and became a socialist while studying natural history at Zurich University. Luba was arrested for the first time in 1887 for smuggling illegal literature across the Russian border. She was subjected to such sadistic treatment while in solitary confinement that she attempted suicide. When she finally came to trial, she was sentenced to an additional 18 months in jail. Returning to Vilna in 1889, Luba proved herself to be brave and clever, full of common sense and energy. She spent day and night leading kreisen, as well as nursing sick workers and their families. She soon became a part of the leadership circle of the group of Jewish Social Democrats, soon to become the Jewish Labour Bund, along with Arkady Kreml, Patti Srednitsky-Kreml, Ishai Eisenstadt, and others. Luba wrote and translated proclamations and brochures in support of organizing Jewish workers using Yiddish as the language of struggle. This was in addition to the existing tradition of educating workers in the Russian language and in natural history before beginning to teach them political economy. Luba developed a reputation as something of an intellectual aristocrat. Toward the end of, amongst the workers of Vilna, Anna Rosenthal wrote in later years that although Luba was not loved by the workers in the way that Patti Srednitsky-Kreml always was, she was very well respected, and her kreisen were always full. Luba Levinson and Ishai Eisenstadt were married in 1891. Toward the end of 1893, they left Vilna for Germany, where they met Vladimir Lenin. The three often discussed politics, but the Eisenstadts were annoyed by the intolerance that the Russians showed to anyone who disagreed with him. Most of their time in Germany was spent studying the success of German social democracy and arranging to smuggle illegal literature into Russia. They returned to Vilna in 1895. By the end of the year, the group sent Luba to work as an organizer in Bialystok. 3 months later, she was arrested in that city on the 20th of February, 1896. She spent 15 months in jail, again in solitary confinement, followed by 5 years of exile to Siberia. The Jewish workers of Vilna accompanied Luba to the train station when she was taken away and held a large protest demonstration in her honor. The Eisenstadts arrived back in European Russia in 1902, so they missed out of the actual founding of the Bund by being in Siberian exile. And when they returned in 1902, they brought with them their 6-month-old daughter. Faced with the choice between giving up revolutionary activity and giving up her child, Luba decided to make a personal sacrifice in order to remain politically active. In 1903, she brought her daughter to her sister, who lived in New York, with the intention of leaving the child there to be raised by her aunt. While at her sister's house, Luba took a cooling bath on a hot New York summer day and drowned in the tub. Although there were suspicions at the time that she had committed suicide, the coroner's report states that she was a case of death by misadventure. This was based on the content of the letter that the young mother was writing before she stopped to bathe, in which she wrote of her intention to return to Russia. Luba Levinson Eisenstadt died in New York City on the 26th of June, 1903, at age 37. Next, we're going to hear about a Bundistkes of the next generation, Rosa Eichner, who was born in 1879 and was murdered in Treblinka in 1942. Reisele was born near Minsk to middle-class parents. She joined the Bund in Minsk and soon served as a messenger for the Bund Central Committee. In 1903, still known as Reisele, she joined a group of revolutionary students and soon began to organize sock makers in Vilna. before moving on to Warsaw and Lodz. During the years of reaction, she led Kreisen with local workers in Lodz and worked in a library. When she first met her future husband, Janke Weisner, he was a Bundes student at the Lodz Commercial School whose students Rosa was trying to organize, and they soon married. During the interwar years, Rosa was active in the Yiddish schools, in the Bund women's organization YAF, in Skif. She was a member of the Lodz Bund committee, and she was well thought of as a public speaker, so she was elected to the Lodz City Council on the socialist ticket. Rosa also toured cities and towns with lecture tours and helped to organize election campaigns. In addition, Rosa published reports, correspondence, and short articles about women's and workers' issues under her own name in the Lodz publication Wekel between 1923 and 1936, and in the Warsaw Volkszeitung between 1935 and 1938. On the 6th of September 1939, the Lodz Bund Committee held a meeting at the Eichner's flat at 7 a.m. in order to decide which Chaverim would remain in the city during the Nazi onslaught, which began that same day in Lodz. Rosa was one of many Bundisten who were arrested at the beginning of the occupation. While the others were murdered, Rosa was tortured for 3 months and then released along with a group of prostitutes. Although her body had been broken, Rosa's spirit was whole, and she still called for struggle and strength. Once she was freed, Rosa left for Warsaw along with her 2 children, Janek and Mielke, who was a trained nurse. They were all active in the underground Bund in Warsaw and were sent to manage the Medem Sanatorium 1 hour's travel from the Polish capital. The family remained there until the sanitarium was liquidated on the 22nd of August, 1942, 79 years ago today. Rosa encouraged the children and sang to them at night, as well as teaching them to retain their pride and so to resist. On the day that the remaining children of the Medem Sanatorium were taken to the train to Treblinka, Rosa refused to leave them, although she had a chance to do so. She comforted the children who were not capable of running off to the forest and kissed them as they waited for the train on that hot summer day. Both of her own children joined her on that last road. Rosa Eichner was 63 when she was murdered in Treblinka. Okay.
Ashenem Dank, Bobby /Lehrerin, mein Mum. We're going to have the opportunity to ask our panelists some questions now. So I'm going to ask our panelists to turn their cameras on and we will spotlight you. We will try and answer as many questions as you have, of course, time permitting. If you can send them through to me, listed as Bundistkes, that would be great. And we will try and get through all of them. I'll get the ball rolling with an interesting dilemma that we have as Bundisten, who obviously are very proud of our history and those involved. Everyone knows the name of Patti Kremel, but very few know the names of the 2 Bundistkes in attendance at the founding of the Bund, Mere Jalutsky and Rosa Grimblatt. Why do you think some women have been remembered so clearly for their contributions to the Bund, but others have not? I'll leave that open for any of the panelists to answer.
I would say that it's probably because Patti continued to be very active in the Bund and Bundes circles until her death, whereas the others were not, and in fact, at various points in their careers became Bolsheviks.
There you go. Anyone else like to add anything? Hinda, you mentioned earlier, you know, obviously quite different now at SCIF. There are many kreisen named after women, but you mentioned the difficulty of having limited kreisen named after Bundistkes. How do you think that that's evolved in terms of the Bund community and culture over time? Have you found a change happen? You're on mute, Hinda.
I think there's definitely been a change. I think the change has been slow. Certainly at the time when I was at SCIF, it didn't make sense to me because my feminism was a direct outgrowth of being a Bundist. If you believe in equality, then surely you believe in equality for women. But I was actually teased quite a bit for being a feminist. It was not pleasant. I don't think that's the case today, but I think feminism as a philosophy is much more socially accepted today than it was back then. So I think the Bund has moved with the time. Certainly I recall not so long ago, maybe it was 10 years ago, being at a meeting at the Bund, in the Bund in Wax House and looking around the wall, and the only woman whose photo was on the wall was actually Rachel Holzer. You'll be happy to know, Yoni, that she was there, but she was the only one. And I remember saying, I'm a Bundist in everything I do in my life, but I will not be a financial member of the Bund until you have more photos of women on the walls. I am now a financial member of the Bund, and I think you know, things have moved quite rapidly since then in terms of greater awareness of the role of women. I think we have a long way to go to even it out, to be honest. You know, I remember hearing one 19th of April, oh, we've got women in it, and that was one poem by one woman. I think there's a long way to go. I don't want to sound negative. I want to encourage the Bund. I think you're doing great. I think there are some really incredible badass women who've been leaders in recent years, and some incredible women coming through that I think are really going to shake up the world, and some men who support feminism as well. So I think it's changing, and that's brilliant, and may it keep changing.
Danke, Hinda. We've had a question come through. A thread through the Bundistkes seems to be their backgrounds, which were quite anathema to becoming a Bundist. Did this differ from their male counterparts? It seems to me that it may have been tougher to have their voices heard. Would anyone like to comment on that? How their background shaped their experiences?
I would think that the revolutionary generation, the first revolutionary generation, was male and female, faced great difficulties because being the first revolutionary generation, their parents were not Bundisten and were not revolutionaries of any sort. So that both men and women faced great difficulties in coming out to their families as socialists. Clearly, it was more difficult for the women than for the men because of the role of women in society in those days. But it was an issue for all. And we're talking about some very brave people.
And I think Daniel sort of made light of it earlier, but definitely having the bravery to tell your Hasidic parents that you're turning away from that background to become a Bundist is exceptionally difficult. And of course, we as a community are the better for it, but it would not have been an easy decision.
Can I add to that, that I think it difficult for anyone coming from a Hasidic family. Certainly, and you know, I'm from Bundistkes on both sides of the family, but before that, rabbis, and that was actually quite common. But I want to say that for a woman in a Hasidic family, that is particularly hard because she has been brought up with the belief, Kol be'isha be'erva, a woman's voice is lewd, nakedness, and should not be spoken in public. And so to become someone outspoken who is fighting for equality, who is fighting for rights, would really have flown in the face of that religious philosophy that wanted women to be silent. So I think we really do need to salute their courage because it really is exceptional.
Another question we've received is, could someone comment or discuss why women played such an active role in the Bund given traditional gender roles in the late 1800s? What was it about the Bund that allowed women to play those important roles?
The democracy of the Bund, and not all socialist or revolutionary movements at the time within the Russian Empire were democratic in nature. And the fact that the Bund was democratic in nature allowed it to recognize the value of women as a whole and female individuals who became leaders of the organization.
This next question I'll direct to Yoni, our freshest panelist, so to speak. And as mentioned earlier, this is really your debut, Yoni, as a representative of SCIF and the Bund. So I'll ask you a very difficult question, which hopefully isn't too difficult. Before I asked Hinda about her experiences with the Bund previously and how that's changed, what is your experience in terms of badass Bundistkes being represented at SCIF today? I mean, I'll make mention of one of them, which is your Vorsitzer, Rachel, who is here this evening. But Yoni, can you speak to how badass Bundistkes are represented or presented to you as SCIFisten today?
Yeah, I think we have a lot more Kreise named after female Bundistkes or just females in general. And I think that's really important because it shows, you know, both sides and like a variety of different people. And I think also seeing the Helfer do like female Vorsitzer, female Helfer take charge and do like lead initiatives within SCIF is really good. Yeah, and also like bringing in new ideas and more Yiddishkeit and other things that they think is important, like inspires me to, you know, do that stuff and move forward. And recently there were 2 female Vorsitzer, which was really cool.
Fantastic. Thank you, Yoni. We have a question for Daniel as Secretary of the Bund. So flip your hat, Dan. Can you speak to the female representation in the Bund today, the ratios of the committee, et cetera, et cetera?
Good question. There are, I'm actually not, well, Deborah, you might be able to help me on this with your vice president hat on, but I guess that being said, Deborah is our vice president, and we've also got, I don't know if it's exactly 50%.
It's, I would say at this point, 50% of our significant positions on the committee, meaning executive and head roles or leadership roles, are held by women. So for example, we're also joined this evening by Alana, who is our, and Indigo, who are our representatives of YB. We have Alya, who is our treasurer as well. So women are taking, I shouldn't say taking up, we're taking our place, our rightful place on the committee and
And it's definitely
participate
something
in
that's
all
been
areas.
growing as well.
And Dan, why do you think that's grown so quickly now compared to previous generations?
I think, well, it's definitely, even since I've joined the committee, which was 2013. It would, no, well, no, it would have been a bit later, but that's okay. There's been, yeah, quite a few more women joining the committee, which is great. I think having being a part of a helper group where I feel like it's a very even representation. I don't think that I worked with Ellie, for example, as the FOS itself, and we had about 50% at some point in my helpering, because obviously we're limited to the age of the people that are coming up, and if there's only a certain amount of males or females on that side, you know, the numbers can get skewed a bit. But I think we've had really great leaders, like Yoni was saying, and especially in recent years when we had, or it's been, even when I was a skiffist, there was a time where there's 2 female FOS itself, and for those who might not be from a skiff background, that's the leader of the movement or the chairperson of the movement. And I think that gives the skiffistan role models to look up to, and that want to continue to work to high positions within our movement and influence it in that way. So yeah, it's been really great, and I think we'll continue to see the numbers just get bigger and bigger.
Fantastic. Thank you, Javel Dan. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this evening, but I think we can all agree, based on what we've heard from all of our panelists, a woman's place is in the resistance. I'd like to thank our panelists, Hinda Burstein, Yoni Ringelblum, Bobby Zilberman, and Daniel Goldberg, for sharing their time and their expertise with us this evening. If you've enjoyed this session and you're keen to find out about future events, including our secular Yom Kippur, which is coming up, including an event for toddlers, as well as adults, you can find us on Facebook at Jewish Labour Bund Melbourne, or check out our website. Chava Shaft, everyone, and a gute Nacht.
Gute Nacht.